Keep Out House by Shel Silverstein. At last I finished my keep out house. A house that's meant for privacy, a house that's meant for peacefulness, a house just meant for only me. There is no door where strangers knock, no window where they peek and grin, a perfect private keep out house. Now, how do I get in? Hi, my name is William James Lindberg, and this is the Chapel of Poetry, where here in this place, we celebrate the words of our fellow human beings, those words that they have been gifted with from the gods of the stars above that rain down to this earth through the aether. And these poets, they hear these words and transmute them from lead into gold on the page. And tonight we are going to celebrate the words of Mac Crary. And from his bio, from his book Hypotenuse, Mac is deaf and unpublished. He won the Pennsylvania Governor's School Scholarship for Poetry in 1978 when he was in high school. He once placed second at a Seattle Poetry Slam, and his home is in Seattle, is in Chinatown. I met Mac at the Homeland Open Mic on the House in Seattle, Washington, and I couldn't tell when I first heard him read that he was deaf, because he wasn't tone deaf. He wasn't born deaf. But I don't think Mac was deaf at all. He could hear, because when you listen to his poems, he can hear. And the one thing I want to note about Mac's poetry before we begin is that Mac's poetry speaks to another generation of people, to that other generation of people who like to sit with their words, to sit with the words in order to tease out the meaning of them. Like poets like Omar Khayyam, and his words that became clearer as the more times you read them, the more times you sat with him. Omar Khayyam's quatrains became more clear to understand. And Dylan Thomas is another poet who you have to sit with for a while to understand and to listen to his words. And in the act of listening, you can tease out the meaning through the sounds on the page. And Dylan Thomas's poetry is referred to many as being very obscure, and I'm not sure that Mac Crary's poetry is obscure, but it does seem like that the first time or two that you read them. And without much further ado, I am going to begin reading about 3 of his poems. Were my words on fire? Were my words on fire tonight, I would fetch water so as not to explain. A candle's rhythmic intensity, magnified by darkened reflections, caught in the moments of people cheering an evening's ambience. With lazy comments and tapioca, yes, a candle is enough fire for me right now. Is it not true that books grew on trees? I wish sometimes I could chew them, become nourished with meaning that way. For I need for knowledge in my body of which I do not have to be held aware. Were my words on fire tonight, I would fetch water so as not to explain. Instead, may I flute like an amateur saxophone through riffs as careless as tired children, lines pulling us back from limitless bounds where wisdom surges like the tempest of lovers in a crucible. Were my words on fire tonight, I would fetch water so as not to explain old wounds. If the sheen reflected in the cab windows could speak, would it not be halting voices of broken partnership stumbling blindly like the blues to exhibit the custard of old wounds? Pain is always considered to be the midwife of sentiment, but the mass is left critically deformed, hawking in evenings, romantic longing to find their voice in another song of love stillborn. Yes, poetry is the most pitiless sweatshop of all. The crucibles that leave their streaked mascara among the brooding of the heaving and forgotten human race are rummage bins where the cracked vanities of frustrated blush leave scars behind as victorious armies smear the prison society of our tears. Each midlife crisis is a revolution, crushed like the hopes of children in the hands of cynical teachers. What made me believe? Was it this song I heard like an heirloom lullaby? What made me throw my fortune to unknown comrades? What made me carry the weight of a fool's nightstand? I dream of an emphatic jester hurling a book across the room. But what is the point of dramatizing old wounds? The wound keeps ripping like a Muslim prayer, housing in my stomach like a smite, twisting a sword in my quest for the rest, and meaning I believe it stands a chance of ripping my being off a coat hanger of my existence, offering only the cloak available to the nakedness of my death. If only I could keep warm like the bourbon in a glass of ice and pull it on like smoky lights playing charades with the ghosts of Tramp Town. Oh, bellicose sun. Oh, bellicose sun. You go down when day is done. Rise and fall. O bellicose sun, axes of the wheel, rise and fall. Red to orange to yellow, burning so bright. O bellicose sun, now hidden by night. Wow. And he's got a lot of good lines in here. What made me believe? Was it this song I heard like heirloom lullaby? What made me throw my fortunes to unknown comrades? What made me carry the weight of a fool's nightstand? I dream of an emphatic gesture, hurling a book across the room, but what is the point of dramatizing old rooms? Each midlife crisis is a revolution crushed like the hopes of children in the hands of cynical teachers. What made me believe? And I think we've all experienced that. And me, as a person who was born with a learning disability, I understand that wound. And then this other thing of what I had mentioned, the sitting with the words, the chewing on the words, the eating of the words in order to gain knowledge from them. And that's what he writes about in this poem. That's what he writes about in his poetry. The eating of the word. And when you eat the word, you know the word. But you may not be able to explain it to somebody, but you just know it. And Mac's poetry speaks to me in in a deep place. In a deep place. And I chose to juxtapose his poem with the Shel Silverstein poem, The Keep Out House, because because of that obscurity that is there when in the very initial reading, or just in the hearing of it. But when the hearing of it out loud, there is this whole other layer to it. And Shel Silverstein is very lyrical and very musical on the page, and the poem reminds me of like Dylan Thomas or Brandon Pitts or Clayton Eshelman's The Yellow River Record, and many other poems. And some people have said that my poetry is kind of like that too, kind of like word music. And I'm going to finish this by reading a poem of Dylan Thomas. And this is The Grief Thief of Time. And maybe you want to listen to it a few times and to try to soak in the meaning of it, or go find the poem for yourself and read it out loud. And read the poem out loud and try to tease out those deep meanings of the sounds as they fall off your tongue. The Grief Thief of Time by Dylan Thomas. Grief thief of time crawls off the moon-drawn grave with the seafaring years. The knave of pain steals off. The sea have faith. That blew time to his knees. The old forget the cries. Lean time on tide, and times the wind stood rough. Call back the castaways, riding the sea light on a sunken path. The old forget the grief, hack of the cough. The hanging albatross cast back the bone of youth, and salt-eyed stumble bedward where she lies, who tossed the high tide in a time of stories, and timelessly lies loving with the thief. Now, Jack, my fathers, let the time-faced crook, death flashing from his sleeve with swag of bubbles in a seedy sack, sneak down the stallion grave, bull's eyes the outlaw through a eunuch crack, and free the twin box grief. No silver whistles chase him down the weeks, day peaks to death. These stolen bubbles have the bites of snakes and the undead eye teeth. No third eye probe into a rainbow's sex that bridge the human halves. All shall remain on the grave-ward gulf, shaped with my father's thieves.